So this is the Design Advisory Panel meeting for June 27, 2024, and I'm calling the meeting to order. And just a reminder, the meeting will be live streamed and video recorded for the public. So do we have any late items to introduce today? Doesn't look like it, so we'll move forward. Are there any additions to tonight's agenda? All right, I don't see any. So can I have a motion to adopt the agenda for tonight? Okay, Kevin, seconded by, can I have a seconder? By Nathan. Okay, all in favor? All right. So the agenda has been passed. All right, so looks like we don't have any minutes to adopt this week. So we'll move on from that. So for presentations, we've got one presentation tonight, and it's on the Form and Character Development Permit Guidelines project. So will we have a city staff introducing that for us tonight? All right, Lania, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. It's great to see you all. As you know, we have a slightly different outline for tonight. We're pleased to provide an update on the Form and Character Development Permit Design Guidelines project and to seek your input, which will inform the drafting of some new design guidelines for the City of Nanaimo. As you know, the design panel's mandate is to review development permit applications and to provide recommendations based on the applicable design guidelines. It's also an objective of the panel to assist staff in establishing guidelines to ensure that the form and character of future development is of high quality and meets the needs of the community. So we certainly appreciate your time and your insights into this particular project. Today's agenda is going to include a presentation and facilitated discussion led by our project consultant, BOP, and that stands for Boniface Alexiak Politano Architects, and they'll also introduce their extended team members. I'll let Sarabi and Kristen introduce all of those members in a moment. Other staff I just want to note in the room, the boardroom that are assisting on this project and leading this project is Lisa Brinkman, Manager of Community Planning, and Alicia Fesser is also assisting in note-taking from Community Planning. I see Jeremy Holm, Director of Planning Development, as well in the room. I should note that this workshop is one of several engagement events underway. We recently met with representatives from neighborhood associations throughout the city. We received public input at a general open house, and a workshop has been completed with design professionals in the architects, design professionals, landscape professionals in that industry. We'll also be engaging the city's advisory committee on accessibility and inclusiveness. And really the goal is to gain insights from a broad range of people and professionals in our community who use the design guidelines to inform their work and to ensure a high quality in the built form. So we're excited to hear from you today. I hope you brought your creative hats and will be inspired to share some insights, whether it's on projects that you've designed yourselves or experienced, lived at, driven by, or maybe some experience from elsewhere. And certainly if you think of comments that you want to share after today's session, there is an opportunity on our Get Involved Nanaimo webpage for this project page, and you can add comments there until July 21st or contact staff and we can provide some direction there as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sarabi, and thanks again.
Thanks, Lania. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being with us today. My name is Sarabi, and with my project teammate, Kristen here, we're both going to give you a short presentation before we get into the discussion phase of the evening. So I'll just share my screen to start. Can everyone see my screen? All right, so yeah, good evening and thank you again. Today we're here to talk about Form and Character Development Permit Guidelines Update, as Lena explained. This is an important implementation item that came out from the city plan, Nanaimo Reimagined, which is the official community plan for Nanaimo. And the city did a lot of work on this from 2020 to 2022. And we're excited to be a part of this implementation item from that plan. Just a little bit about us. I work with Boniface Elixir Politano Architects. My name is Surabhi. And on our team, we have Kristen from Elk Plan Design. And we have Kevin from Bob Architects and Jason, who's a part of Perry and Associates Landscape Architecture, along with Thaddeus. And then finally, we have Angie from Focal Engineering here with us today. So we'll just begin with a brief introduction of the project and where we're at until today.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kristen. I'll be presenting with Surabhi today. So a development permit, I'm sure is something you're really familiar with, but we'll just provide a bit of background so we make sure we're all on the same page. A development permit is a land use permit used by local governments. They're used to look at the exterior design of proposed buildings on private property. Nanaimo also uses development permits to make sure that new buildings meet the policies and objectives of our city plan, Nanaimo Reimagined. There are lots of different kinds of development permits, but today we are focused on one kind called a Form and Character Development Permit. In Nanaimo, the Form and Character Development Permits apply to multifamily, commercial, industrial, and mixed-use projects. And these include things like landscaping, the mix of materials on a building, and connections for walking and accessing a site. And this little illustration you can see here is just highlighting some different ways that we see design guidelines affecting kind of the ultimate form of buildings and the properties that they're on. The guidelines help our team at the city work with developers and landowners to improve the overall appearance and functionality of a building. And this really sets the tone for the quality of design that we expect to see in Nanaimo. There are some examples from here in Nanaimo on this slide, and all these details that we see help to achieve better urban design in the city. And this really leads to more comfortable spaces to visit, work, and live in. So I hope that some of these images are familiar and just inspiring for the conversation that we have today. We use these guidelines alongside other tools like zoning. So as we work together today, it's just really good to keep in mind that these guidelines are one piece of the puzzle in shaping the city.
So talking about the city plan again, Nanaimo city plan was really the starting place for the project that we're talking about today. It is the city's strategic planning document that provides direction for the next 25 years on land use, truth and reconciliation, climate adaptation, diversity, economic prosperity, sustainable living, and more. Through the city plan development process, a lot of community engagement was conducted, and this helped set the priorities for the city, like the 5 goals illustrated here, aiming for a green, connected, prosperous, healthy, and empowered Nanaimo. So the design guidelines were identified in the implementation plan, and it's really exciting to be moving ahead with this work and implement all the thoughtful input that was contributed towards the city plan. So when thinking about the project goals for the updated design guidelines, one of the major goals is that we would like to respond to the changes in the BC Energy Step Code and the Zero Carbon Step Code and other such provincial requirements and promote energy and water conservation and the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. The design guidelines would also reinforce the vision for land use designations and goals set in the city plan. And it's really important that we create one comprehensive document which is easier to navigate and contains all the relevant guidelines in one place. And also we would like to update and include really robust landscape guidelines to the design guidelines update. So we started this process earlier this year, and once again, this has been informed by policies and research and by the input provided by the city plan. So you can see on this timeline graphic that the conversations we're having today are early in the process, and we're aiming to have a draft of the design guidelines ready in fall, and there'll be an opportunity for review and further feedback at that stage as well.
Now we're going to move into, I guess, the second part of the presentation where we're going to kind of share some information that might be helpful for our discussion today. And so what you'll see is some information about different sort of sections or topic areas in the design guidelines that are important that we're really hoping to get your input on today. So we'll give you a brief overview of each of these topic areas, and then we'll open up for a big discussion at the end. To start, we just wanted to highlight just how we know how important and unique each neighborhood in Nanaimo is. So it's really important for all of us to understand what's working really well in certain neighborhoods in the city, and this can help to inform the design guidelines. On this next map, we see all the different neighborhoods in Nanaimo. So as we work together today, just think about how are you seeing developments be informed by their neighborhood context? And what do you wish was there? What would you wish you saw more of on buildings and sites in these specific neighborhoods? So next topic that we will be talking about is related more specifically to urban design of townhouses and multifamily apartment buildings. So just keep in mind for all of this that the focus is on private property because that's where the guidelines apply. And so design features can be things on the outside of buildings or the area around it, like landscaping. Here you can see a few examples of townhouse projects. These include different ground-oriented and low-rise building forms like side-by-side townhouses or small detached units on a lot. And now moving on to apartments. We're also really thinking about apartment buildings that can be up to 6 stories high. These are typically wood frame construction. And here you can see a few examples of apartment buildings. As we work together today, just think about the features on the building, the site, and the landscape design. Like what form and character design features have you found are important for townhouse and apartments? And how might the design guidelines support bringing these features into new projects? Since we know there are a lot of really special places in Nanaimo, like along corridors or in residential areas, give some thought to what unique features are needed in specific parts of our city.
And then moving on, we're also next going to discuss design features for mixed use, commercial, and industrial buildings. And again, the focus here is on private property, as that's where the design guidelines would apply. And that includes the building, open spaces, and landscape in private property. So let's start with thinking about mixed-use buildings. And for the purpose of the discussion today, we're thinking of buildings with commercial or retail at grade and multifamily residential above. These can range from 4 stories to taller buildings. And they can be found primarily in downtown, urban centers, neighborhood centers, and mixed-use corridors in Nanaimo. Then we'll be thinking about commercial buildings. So these include retail, office buildings, or buildings with a combination of retail and office. And also we'll be thinking about industrial buildings. So for our discussion today, we'll be focusing more on light industrial buildings, as these would be more suitable in the urban context with appropriate design treatment and transition between other users. So we would like to ask you again to consider features on the building, the site, and landscape design, and think about what form and character design features you found to be important for these kind of developments, and how can design guidelines support in bringing more of these features forward. And again, like things that are missing or things that we wish to see more of in Nanaimo. And there are a lot of special places in Nanaimo. So what unique features are needed in specific parts of the city while thinking about these kinds of buildings? And finally, we'll be talking about energy efficiency. So energy efficiency really thinks about like reducing energy consumption, minimizing environmental impact, and improving comfort for people in new developments. It's an important part of the design guidelines update because it will reflect the new provincial codes and the improved industry practices. So here you can see a few examples of buildings that are passive house or LEED certified. And then on this slide, we're just showcasing a few examples of sustainable design strategies. And we'd like to hear from you. What energy efficiency solutions are you seeing being integrated into new buildings or sites? Are there other emerging energy efficiency solutions that you would like to see in the developments in the future? So with that, we just have summarized all of the questions on this last slide for reference, and we'll pass the conversation back to chair and committee to start discussing on some of these things.
All right, thank you for the presentation. So I guess we can do a round table for each of the questions one by one. So yeah, so the first question there, how are you seeing developments informed by their neighborhood context? And what do you wish there was more of on new buildings and sites in specific neighborhoods? So I'll just go through our different members who are here today. Nathan, would you like to start off with some comments on that?
Sure. I guess in more of a general question I have, first of all, is in terms of what are these guidelines for, in terms of who are they for? And I just, these are just very general points I'm making, and just to inform you that we don't use design guidelines as designers. I've rarely ever looked at them because designers know what to do. And so are these design guidelines for the public, or are they for planners, or are they intended to influence designers? And it's a real question, because from my point of view as a designer with 40 years of experience, there's nothing there to focus design, and there's not enough clarity and definition to direct design from. They're a lot more like make it nice as a term. Sure, we can make it nice, but there's nothing to make it nice from. There's not enough rigor in the process. So I leave that there. There's a lot to discuss, but in terms of the specifics of this was focused on townhouse. That was that question, townhouses. I'm sorry. What was the specific question we were asking or requesting?
The question we're starting with is, how are you seeing developments being informed by their specific neighborhood context? So we're thinking about trying to maintain the character of the unique neighborhoods in Nanaimo.
So, I mean, Nanaimo has some fantastic character neighborhoods, and they are all typically old character neighborhoods where prior to the way it's done now. and that's what the charm is. They're small buildings. They've been built by people instead of capitalist ventures for the most part, and that's what gives them the charm. You look at Brecken, the neighborhood areas, the South End, particularly old city neighborhoods. These buildings were primarily done by people, and they weren't speculative buildings, and they weren't generic. So they have phenomenal variety and efforts to make them work for specific contexts, whereas the new construction that we see now is quite exempt of that. So in terms of that, there is variety. There's a wonderful variety in typologies, and there's history there. There's some very interesting things. I think there's a lot to be said about how to create variety. And I've had a lot of conversations with the city about how zoning has to direct that more. And that's, we can get into that conversation a bit more about how we can create, there's lots of ways design guidelines and zoning can be much more assertive, not prescriptive, which is the term, the counterbalance frequently I hear. It's about much more assertive about how to direct variety and different typologies, because it doesn't happen by accident. It comes about, what we see is because of our policies. And so the ideas of setbacks, the ideas of all the things, height restrictions, they create the monotonies in the current context. And I can elaborate a lot more on that. So what we need to be doing is taking the policies to counter that, not to make the generic policies to cover it all. And good examples are height. Why do subdivisions, current new subdivisions, all look monotonous? Well, for several reasons, mostly capitalistic gain. We know how to make great buildings, but we don't, because economics. The height restrictions is one of the monotonous criteria. So how could you create non-monotony through a policy? And I've talked quite extensively with the planners about this. They have all the wording in their bylaws, but they won't enact on them. So, for example, height variation is one of the key components to non-monotony. Look at great towns, fairly recent urban planning, a seaside, lots of stuff in Florida that take active conditions to create height variation within the policies. Just for height, but there's all kinds of other different ways to break monotony and the drabness of the built environment. So a good example would be, well, for example, height takes a maximum height based on a certain definition. So you look at every new subdivision, every building virtually hits that, and that's it. And they're all blank, monotonous from there on. If you took an example, say, look, what Seaside does in Florida, you could exempt height for 10% of your roof, say. And our bylaw has wording of such, but it restricts it to sustainable and different specific things. But say you exempted 10% of a roof from height, people would take advantage of that at their cost to get some advantage, like a view or something. So that wording is in the bylaw, but it will not be enacted on unless you go for a variance. And that's far down the road to stop it. So the wording in the bylaws and the policies should take much more assertive roles to break that monotony of height, just height. And they can, but they won't, and they don't. There's all kinds of other things that they do create in terms of the monotony, and they're described to me as a blanket thing to cover all. But the problem is the monotony itself, and it comes from such a force from outside of our control. The zoning and the bylaws and the guidelines have to counter it very aggressively and assertively and skillfully. And they can, but there isn't any wording in there that does. And certainly in the zoning policies, there could be, and certainly in the bylaws or in the OCP guidelines, there should be, but there aren't. And it's very general. It's in the category of make it nice, and it doesn't assertively and aggressively go after these problems. So that's so in terms of the specific question, there's variety in our old city neighborhoods, fantastic, but it's come about because it was there. We're about to damage that by intervening. and the policies have to make much more active, be aware of that. I think they have to have much more sophisticated vocabulary, particularly visual vocabulary, which has to be much more elevated to even challenge that. So I think there's a lot there. There's certainly many layers we can discuss in there, but that's enough for now. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Nathan, and thanks, Kristen, for posting that question in the chat. I think that's helpful. So yeah, I guess this is more of a discussion. If any of the panel members want to build off anything Nathan said, you can always put up your hand and we can go to you next. Otherwise, I'll just go through my list. But yeah, Kevin, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I really want to thank the city staff, Lania, Jeremy, Lisa, and I saw Dale stick his head in there a while ago. Reports that the city presents now are very clear, very presentable, and even the covering letter, the report, which explains what has been happening so far and how it's proceeding and the timelines that are going to be happening. I think the city has done a fantastic job, and over the years I've been on many like with this panel and different projects like this that have come up, and there's so many questions that need to be asked just regarding of how things are proceeding and things. So I just want to thank you, and also the 14 groups. I did research you guys and checked you guys out, and I was very impressed. I have never seen you at our committees before, and I really like your focus on this. So thank you all very much for that. With respect to Nathan's comments, totally agree with his comments regarding height and siting and variation. We are really lucky here on the West Coast. There's so much architectural freedom. Builders don't buy up acres of land and put a choice of 4 houses on them like Toronto and Saskatchewan and other areas do, where what Nathan mentioned, all the houses look the same. They're all the same height. They're all the same, like you might have a choice of 2 different claddings on the outside. But we are lucky here, but I agree with him that variations in height, reducing footprints, increasing heights to reduce the footprint, those are the types of things that I like to see in most areas of Nanaimo. With respect to the question that we're focused on right now, I think what I'm seeing in a lot of the areas of Nanaimo are done quite well. I'm not going to say shoot my own horn and say the design advisory panel is responsible for that, but developers are stepping up, and neighborhood guidelines. I think this is one of the things that we have: our design guidelines, and then we have all our neighborhood design guidelines. And there's a fine line between what architects should be focusing on and also what us as panel members should be focusing on. And it's especially true, like what Nathan said. You drive down certain areas, Stewart Avenue, areas that are prime for big development, and you see some beautiful heritage houses along these areas, and then you see a couple of ugly houses that are old, run down, and a developer wants to tear them down and put up a multifamily development. And how do you pay respect to the neighborhood now when maybe 30 years from now all those old beautiful heritage houses might be torn down? Who knows? And so there's a fine line between that, and I think that's what with form and character I believe focus with a lot of the mixed use and commercial and multifamily should be more focused on the major nodes of the city, and the rural areas should try to be kept more rural, and that reflects in not only what's built there, but if it is multifamily, how it relates to things like parking. Uh, I remember with the downtown urban design guidelines that were done, that I was a part of, the urban planner showed pictures of European cities where there's no parking, but we're talking urban areas, downtown, big cities. And whereas in rural areas, I think we need to also protect the rural areas. I mentioned this the other week. For the last 30 or 40 years, the three most popular vehicles that are sold, three highest, are pickup trucks. And pickup trucks are not meant to be in an urban setting, but they're meant to be more in a rural setting. And I think we need to try to also protect our rural areas to make sure that if there are multifamily developments going in there, that things like parking, amenity spaces, and things like that. Amenity spaces everywhere. But I'm a big proponent of reduced parking. Don't get me wrong, but there's areas where that needs to be. So that's and like what Nathan said, the height restriction. Totally in agreement of looking at ways that bylaws can change to increase height restrictions in areas to allow a variation in form and character, because it took us years and years to get the height restriction increase from 27 feet. Jeremy's there, I see him, and he knows what it's like, from 27 feet to 29 feet. And just that little bit of, or 29 and a half feet. And that 2.5 feet difference in height, it was a fist fight getting that through. And maybe that height restriction, the 9 meter height restriction, isn't enough. Maybe we need to look at increasing that and allowing to reduce footprint and density in areas. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Kevin. Yeah, Lamia, go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to offer some thoughts to the panel. Thank you, Chair. Just in regards to considerations of building height in particular, the city is going to be reviewing the zoning bylaw starting this year into next year, and largely that is to implement the vision that City Plan has established. And it certainly is acknowledged that as we develop our urban centers and corridors and other parts of the city, the zoning regulations need to align to support that vision. So I just wanted to maybe separate out that reassurance of the bylaw regulations to support development, having that building envelope or regulations in place. Discussion will occur there. But the purpose of the guidelines is really to complement the regulatory framework and focus more on the aesthetic look and feel experience of the built form within the parameters that the zoning bylaw sets. So certainly appreciate the comments and the questions already shared so far, and just wanted to make sure that that it's known that the bylaw certainly is going to be reviewed to reinforce City Plan, and the users of the guidelines could be anyone, such as developers, applicants informing their proposals, staff to determine if a project meets the guidelines so that a positive recommendation can be put forward for approval. And the guidelines would also be used by the design panel, of course, in providing recommendations for consideration. So I hope that helps to answer some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Lania. Yeah, go ahead, Sarabi. Oh, you're muted, I think.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I just wanted to add that when we're thinking about the topic came up about neighborhood design guidelines and the downtown design guidelines. I wanted to reiterate that as a part of this project, we're creating one comprehensive document where all the neighborhood guidelines or the downtown guidelines and old city guidelines would all be combined into this document. So just something to keep in mind, the intention that we're asking about the neighborhood context.
All right, thank you, Sarabi. All right, so from the panel, Angela, would you like to have some comments on the question in the chat?
Oh, yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you to the city staff for all the hard work thus far on this project. I know these things are pretty intensive, so and thank you to Bob for your presentation and your time as well so far into this project. I'm not as fluid as the previous two panel members. I have some things written down, so I'll just go off what I have written down. So just as far as how are you seeing the developments being informed by their neighborhood context, just my experience on the panel, I don't feel like there has been a big emphasis on the neighborhood plans specifically for specific developments. So I feel like in the new design, form and character design guidelines, if we are going to be taking everything and sort of downsizing it to be all inclusive, I do think that applicants should be required somehow to show how they are building their development to be in line with the neighborhood plans and the needs of that neighborhood. The neighborhoods have go through lots of extensive review of their own items that are important. So I think it's important for every application to bring out those neighborhood action plans and show how they've met them. So that's one thing, and just in line with what Nathan said and Kevin, with just creating neighborhoods that are special and have their own identity. So just ensuring that every application, every development has a specific sense of place related to that place and connected to the things that are important to those neighborhood associations, if there is one. I think in terms of the buildings, it's the same thing. So just relating the building to its specific location through appropriate height and architectural expression that takes into consideration the surrounding buildings and the landscaping, the vegetation, the topography, and then also ensuring that viewscapes are considered in detail. I do think that it is important that, like in Nanaimo, we do have a unique situation, like one of our unique features is our viewscapes and our, so I think it's important that we might consider that the design guidelines ensure that each application do a viewscape assessment and look for opportunities to preserve corridors where there might be a view corridor that even from a distance would be important to consider through the site planning. We have ocean views, but we also have mountain views. So I think that the more we can have the applicants show they've considered those things and not impact the surrounding viewscapes negatively, I think that's an important part of our development process. The other part was, I do think the buildings, we sometimes get shadow impact assessments for developments, but I think that we could do that more often. If not, maybe every application should do a shadow impact assessment, depending on the context of its surrounding neighbors. Because that is, that just also relates to the viewscapes and the corridorscapes and just not impacting neighbors with blocking their wonderful sunlight. So that's what I had to say about number 1. If anybody wants to add to it or move on, thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Angela. Kevin, would you like to respond to some of Angela's comments?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to jump on what Angela commented about the neighborhood committee's review. Very, very rarely over the years have we had an applicant come to us after they made a presentation to a neighborhood committee. I think in a lot of the neighborhoods, especially important neighborhoods that are affected by residential areas being torn down and commercial going up, I feel because sometimes they do come to us and say, "Oh yeah, we talked to them. They said just they just kind of spouted out a couple little things of what the comments were." But I think a proper formal presentation to a neighborhood committee. I know this kind of is going against. I know Jeremy's under a lot of pressure with how long the development permit or development a process takes with building, rezoning, and then development permit and everything. It could take a year or more to get this done, and the pressure that the building industry is putting on them. But I think in a lot of cases, especially in important areas, that I think the applicant should do a presentation to the neighborhood associations first before coming to us, so we can feel the feedback that comes from these committees. So I just wanted to add that to Angela's comments. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Kevin. So Hector, would you like to share your thoughts on the first question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think everyone has good points. I'm relatively new to Nanaimo. I've been here just for 5 years. Like for me, the only neighborhood that kind of has a important context is the old city quarters, kind of the old Nanaimo area. The rest of the neighborhoods, I don't see how they can have some input on the context, or like how their context can have some influence on the design of the buildings. But anyways, I agree with most of the comments that they've been said before me. So, yep, that's my comment here. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Hector. Councillor Perino, would you like to share your thoughts?
Oh, thank you, Jonathan. Angela, I thought your comments were excellent. Sorry, I didn't mean to speak when you walked away, but I thought your comments were excellent. But I do want to say we're at Jeremy's throat on a consistent basis to move projects along, right? Because they have our home numbers. And so, the developers have our home numbers, and they call and say, "Where's my permit?" It's a constant struggle. Mm-hmm. The other thing too is I spent about 2.5 hours with one of our neighborhoods this morning, and it was over one particular thing, but we ended up kind of going around, talking about a variety of different things. And neighborhoods don't all get along. Like you're going to get some people who say, I don't want any development. I don't want any more than 2 stories. I don't want trees, or I want trees. I want sidewalks. I don't want sidewalks. Sometimes I kind of think, sometimes we almost open it up too much. So I only say that not because I don't think it's a good idea. When you talked about, developers going into neighborhoods, I get why they don't. I get why they don't, because they get so much flack. So I just wanted to share that because I know how much flack I get. And I also wanted to say, Nathan, oh my God, I'm going to love you forever. I mean, your comments were just so, just such a breath of fresh air, because when I look around town, I see some beautiful things. I love the old neighborhoods. I love some of the newer things we're doing, but I also see that particularly some of our apartment buildings, they look like boxes. You know, they just all the same. And I'd love to see more height differences. And I'd be willing, you know, from a zoning perspective, to be in favor of, you know, bring it on, bring all the differences on. They don't need to be all the same. And even in a building, every floor doesn't need to be the same. You know, I struggle with there is no variation. So it has that, you know, that, what did you say, that I can't remember the term you used, but they just look all the same, you know? And so I thought that was a real breath of fresh air. And also, I'm glad to hear, Kevin, you talked about the parking. Oh yeah, you're right. Downtown is one thing, but I still find, you see these great big F-350s, people are driving right down Commercial, you know, and I'm like, God, you know, it's a rural truck. So we have to be open to everything. So I struggle with some of this. I just, it's good to hear it all, though. Really helpful. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councilor Perino. So that just leaves me, I think. Oh no, Nathan, yeah, go ahead and respond.
Yeah, thank you for some really good comments and discussion here. In terms of the ideas about breaking monotony and things like that, there's a lot that can be done. That has to be complemented, and with probably what an upcoming discussion in this panel will be about energy and energy efficiency and the simplicity that is required to meet that. And we can no longer take the typical planning approach of jigging and jogging things to make them look better. There is a tradition there. It can work, but it doesn't have to be the only strategy. When you look at any European town, a lot of the buildings are fairly similar, but the core issue is that they have quality and integrity of materials, almost inevitably. And there's several other layers in there, but we can make a square box that's 4 stories high, that's 100 feet long, and it can be simply elegant.
Yes.
But it doesn't mean you put hardy panel or cedar or vinyl siding on this thing. Well, mind you, you could, with a very skilled designer. Frank Gehry, for example, has done this very elegantly with chain link fence, but that's beyond the scope of most designers. The issue here is the integrity of the material and longevity. And we've gone through this several times with panelist discussions where there's a beautiful rendering of a brick building that meets the ground, and it's beautiful in the rendering. And then you read the discussion and it's actually simulated brick or hardy panel brick. And you know that this thing is going to look tacky and doesn't have anything to do with the character that's being presented, or the history, or the longevity that's required to age a building for 100 years into a community. Those are the kind of terms of vocabulary we need to start integrating in. And some of the design guidelines, downtown guidelines, actually have a little bit of discussion on that. But in terms of integrity of materials, and longevity of materials and quality of materials, that should be a major part of our vocabulary in the design guidelines. And there isn't a lot there to grapple with from my point of view. So, thank you.
All right, thank you, Nathan. Kevin, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to jump in on that, I totally agree with Nathan. As we approach step code 5 in our climate code, the buildings are going to look boxy. You know, you're not going to see, you're going to see very little corners or articulation, unless it's cosmetic and thrown on the outside. But you are going to see boxy buildings, and as Nathan said, you look at the Aboriginal building across from the Quarterway Hotel, and it's in your presentation there. It's a masterpiece, and it's simple, it's clean, but without the quality materials and also the architect's vision. Sure, we in the future we will see some beautiful buildings, but in more likelihood, unless there are guidelines to ensure the quality of materials and somehow being able to create articulation within step code 5, which is, or passive housing, whatever you want to call it, there will be failures out there unless there's guidelines to ensure quality materials, articulation. I'm not sure how you can enforce articulation unless we're talking about stepping back floors and stuff like that. But I think that's very important in the future that that's addressed, because Nathan knows what we're dealing with in the future to achieve step code 5. And some people are doing it right now, and you look at the buildings and they are very simple, and some of them are very nice, but a lot of them aren't. So thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, so I'll add my comments now. I agree with pretty much everything that's been said, but I'll try to add maybe a few more ideas about landscape since that's my role. So yeah, I think just going back to the question about neighborhood context, I guess if the new development permit guidelines can have an easy way for developers to see what are some of the unique features of each neighborhood, maybe just something more general, that like kind of a list of features they can think about how they want to incorporate that in their own unique way. And I think maybe for some developers or designers, they just don't necessarily know what the unique features are of a specific neighborhood. So there was an easy way for them to just get some ideas, if that somehow worked into the design guidelines, just so that there's more awareness for what are the unique characteristics of a specific neighborhood. And then, yeah, we talk focus a lot on buildings and like creating variation and reducing monotony and how buildings are designed. But like, how do we also do that with permit guidelines related to landscape? So in the Nanaimo area, often there's a push for using more native plant material, but there's several different native plant ecosystems in this area. So some of them are more forests, some of them more grassland, like Harewood Plains. So if there's a guideline requiring native plant material, it might be beneficial to have more neighborhood specificity if there is a unique ecosystem in that neighborhood, like Harewood Plains, for example. So maybe like planting forest vegetation that most of the designers might think of as being native plant material for the area might not be the best choice. So yeah, I guess if we're looking at unique features to a neighborhood, also what are the unique features to the neighborhood's landscape as well? Some neighborhoods have more rocky area, rocky landscape, like Lindley Valley, and I know the steep slope design guidelines right now speak a bit to like using rocks and boulders in some of the retaining features. So thinking about that as well when developing new design guidelines. So yeah, I'll leave it at that for question 1. Before we move on to question 2, just I guess a question for staff and the consultant are the 4 questions on the slide, is that all we're focusing on tonight? just for in terms of time management.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, we'll move on to question 2 now. Kristen, do you mind copying that one into the chat for us?
Yeah. And Jonathan, I was gonna maybe, if everyone's okay with it, combine 2 and 3, just because they're just about different land uses. So that way everyone can feel free to talk about the building types that they're really inspired to talk about. We can do it all at once because the question is the same. Does that sound good?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So I will, if you could copy those into the chat, I'll just read them out loud right now, just to go over
I
them
can also
quick.
share my screen then.
All right, so question number 2. What form and character design features have you found are important for townhomes and apartments? And how can design guidelines support bringing these features into new projects? And how might these differ in specific parts of the city? Consider features on the building, on the site, and landscape design. And then the question number 3 is, I guess, the same, but for mixed use commercial and industrial. So I'll go through our panel, I guess, in reverse order. So I'll still go last though. So I'll start with Councillor Perino. Do you want to start us off?
Oh, thank you, Jonathan. You know, you were talking about landscaping, and what I've seen, particularly for townhomes, you know, obviously areas where people can walk and children can play. I think sometimes we're so busy thinking about cars and biking and that kind of thing that I always want to make sure that people have places to walk with their children and that kind of thing. So for me, you know, I like to. Lainey, are you on there? Is she on there by any chance? Lainey, where was that? Where was that apartment building that we went on the tour where we walked down like in between it? Do you remember that? It was down in.
Halliburton?
Yes, and I thought, oh my God, this is so, you know, not only great walking areas, but areas where you could go in between, and then they had water, ways to gather water on the sides. Like, it was just some really brilliant work done there. And I thought, gee, I wish I could see more of this around Nanaimo. So what was all that can you think of it?
Could you describe it more?
Well, there was definitely, you know, and I realize it can't happen in every area, but wherever possible, I like to see sidewalks and boulevards where we're planting trees, you know, just to keep people away from the road as much as possible. And the beauty that it brings to the street, I think, is really important, particularly when you're putting in high rises. Because it's exactly as Angela talked about, you know, when you're talking about, shadowing and just the shade that buildings provide, wherever you can put space in front with boulevards, trees, things like that, sitting areas, walking areas, those kinds of things. That, for me, with commercial, mixed use, any of those, those are the kind of things that I'd like to see more of. So it's beautiful to look at, and it's very functional for those that are working and living there. And I'll leave it at that. Thanks, John.
All right, thank you, Councillor Perino. Hector, would you like to continue with your comments?
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I mean, in terms of townhomes, actually, I'm gonna talk very much on a personal experience. When I moved to Nanaimo, like 5 years ago, I was thinking of buying a home, and obviously I got outpaced by the market. And when I had enough money to put a down payment, I had to settle for a townhome. And I think that's gonna be the reality for most families in the future. And when I was looking for townhomes in Nanaimo, I didn't have many options. And even right now in this panel, we have seen some townhome projects that I really don't like for 2 reasons. First of all, they don't have driveways, which I found it very bad for 2 reasons. Because again, a lot of people have cars. and they want to use their garages for storage. And also the driveway kind of give a bit of a spacing between units. And I remember when I was looking for townhomes, this is totally around North Nanaimo. It's called the Painted Bulb or something like that. The townhomes are so close to each other that honestly, at that point, it would be better to have an apartment, like an actual apartment tower, than just townhomes, because they're so close to each other that it's very bad. And the other thing, and that kind of relate to the landscape, I think townhomes, they need to have even a small backyard. And again, if it's for families, you want to have kids, you have some space that the kids can run, and again, it creates more of a buffer between units, right? So you don't feel like you are like in top of your neighbors. So that's definitely something that I would like to see in townhomes. I also remember looking in South Nanaimo, there was another project that has like underground parking. That's more the Vancouver style. That it's kind of almost like a hybrid between a low-rise and a townhome, but it might work. So it's the kind of things that maybe we need to look more into details into these, again, form and characters and guidelines for the city. In terms of mixed use and commercial, oh wow, there's so much. I think Nanaimo really needs a lot of mixed use buildings, like real mixed use buildings. In Terminal Avenue, we have all these big box stores that are pretty much empty stores, empty parking lots. And every time I drive in front of those areas, it's just like, oh my God, I just wish we can put like a brand new Save Foods with like 10-story building above it, and maybe a community center or a library that it's integrating like multiple uses, even like a homeless shelter. Anyways, I think as overall, I'm not blaming the city, and I'm not sure how the guidelines can help on this, but yeah, I agree. It's kind of similar to the previous comment from the first question. It's kind of boring, very boring, the developments that we're seeing around. So I hope that somehow these guidelines can push a bit more the developers into a more interesting, more urban kind of development, real urban development. Either they can look at Victoria or Vancouver. I mean, again, we don't need to go that far to look at some good examples of how we can do some nice mixed-use buildings. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Hector. Angela, would you like to share your thoughts next?
Thank you, Jonathan. Okay, so I just have another sort of list that I put together. So just building on Hector's comments too, that was something I thought was really important feature in these townhome developments is having quality amenity spaces, either individually or having a collective space for the residents in each development, and ensuring that there's appropriate play spaces for children, incorporating, more natural play features. Maybe, if there's opportunities, connecting those play spaces to open spaces that might happen to be there, site specific. On the parking topic, I feel like personal experience too. I did live in the first row housing development in Nanaimo, and so anyway, the parking in that area was so tight, and again, everybody was using their garage as storage. It was I did have a truck, but it was very difficult getting in and out, and it did cause issues when somebody was parked. Anyway, I just think that parking for each individual town home development, there's going to be more vehicles as they're meant for families. So there's typically probably more vehicles in a family. So parking, I think that in the guidelines we should be focusing on the specific location of each development and doing sort of a parking analysis of the area versus just going, tight spots all the way through. We're good. This is the way of the future. I think that we need to do more site-specific traffic and parking analysis for each of these types of developments. I think that would be a benefit to Nanaimo to be more site specific with our parking and our traffic flow analysis and off street parking opportunities. So so there's that. I think that we need to ensure that there's, and we're going that way anyways, energy efficient technologies incorporated into the design. Parking and again, in these developments too, I think that the solar shading analysis should be done on all the developments, because with everybody going solar, I think a solar analysis, solar should be done prior to the design of the buildings, so that optimal solar gain can be achieved with solar panels on specific roofs. So it would guide the type of roof and the pitch of the roof prior to the development being created. So that was just on the topic of energy efficiency. Making sure that HVAC and heat pump requirements are incorporated into these townhome developments. And then also not so much on the townhomes, but mixed use and commercial, just making sure that the connectivity to the street isn't forgotten about in the beginning stages, so that designers don't have to go back, and because usually if there aren't units that are connected to the street, there's often a comment to try and connect the lower units to the street. So I feel like that should be in the guidelines, and then if they're not connected to the street, there's a rationale why, because there's some kind of constraint or it doesn't make sense. So that should be, I think, brought to the forefront at the beginning stages of the design. And again, prior to the design being developed, protection of viewscapes and corridors should be considered, unique to that location. And doing like viewscape assessment studies, including analysis of viewscapes and corridors, to protect the urban landscape and characteristics that might be important to that specific location, that specific neighborhood. And this one, this is my list more for commercial multifamily mixed use. Just ensuring that the amenity space is a quality space, either on the site or on the roof deck. So again, in the early stages of design, I think it's important for the designer to ensure that those things are incorporated into design, so we don't have to ask for it later if it's not in the guidelines. It is in the guidelines, but sometimes it doesn't come forward in the initial stages, but just an emphasis on that. And ensuring that stormwater management is incorporated with the natural features of the site and incorporated into the landscape as much as possible, to ensure that we're hitting our targets with energy conservation and water conservation. Obviously incorporating all of our greenhouse gas reducing measures, e-bikes, lots of, just highlighting all the e-bike requirements, EV chargers, solar panels, step code, net zero items. And also referencing, I just thought it was important to consider I don't know if it makes full sense, but having the designers, the applicants consider the BC Active Transportation General Design Guidance tool into their site planning prior to designing the site. So just considering some of those elements that could be connected with the streets through their site design. Safe pedestrian crossings and road connected to roadways, crosswalks and raised crosswalks, but also just making sure that those connections are happening through the site and connected to the sidewalks appropriately and other crosswalks, and ensuring there's safe, visible sight lines along bikeways that are leading onto those crosswalks and roadways. And I guess that could be incorporated into the landscaping provisions a little bit to ensure that there are safe view corridors for safe egress. And I just find that the more bikes we have and electric transportation tools, the more important it's going to be for those sight lines just coming out of driveways and in and out of sites. I think like at speeds that are kind of dangerous for pedestrians. And as far as the landscaping provisions go, just implementing some of the Fire Smart landscaping techniques. I don't think we have that in our guidelines at the moment. I'm not sure. I don't think we reference any Fire Smart techniques, or we do talk about drought tolerant plants, but that again, like Jonathan was saying, should be very site specific to our neighborhoods. And ensuring, let's see what else here, reduce upset. I just had a couple comments on the landscaping approval process. I don't know if I'm going beyond the scope is, but I just thought that I noticed that in the approval procedures that the landscape assurance statement comes from the owner or the agent after the landscaping is installed. And I just felt like it's kind of, I would prefer to see that it would be the landscape professional that would sign off that the landscaping's been installed as per the approved plan. And then I noticed that there was, if there was any resubmitted sort of amended plans for landscaping, the building inspector would sign it off. But I just felt like maybe it should be a planning function to sign off on that prior to the building permit process continuing. So that was just a process comment. So that's all I had. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Angela. So next, let's see here. Kevin, would you like to share your comments next?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Great comments, Angela. I agree with everything that you said. It doesn't leave me much room to add more. And thank your kids too. Thank your kids too. I'm just going to be more general. I agree with everything that's been said so far. I think within the context of these two questions, I'm not going to go into the energy efficiency stuff. I'll leave that for the next question. But for me, I think I would really like to see all these buildings, whether they're townhomes, multifamily, mixed use, industrial, fit within the context of where they're being built, especially from an urban compared to a rural standpoint. I would like to see buildings that are going to be built in a urban setting reflect an urban setting, and I would like to see townhomes and especially townhomes that are going to be built in a rural setting fit a rural setting, and that falls within the form character not only of the building, seeing that it meets and fits into a more of a residential neighborhood, but also that the buildings that are built lend themselves more to families that in a rural neighborhood. So no one bedrooms, maybe the odd 2-bedroom, but a lot of 3 bedrooms in these buildings. And not only that, driveways, and this goes into what at our last meeting, there was the townhome development being built in a very rural setting between 2 schools, a high school and an elementary school, and the units didn't have any driveways. Sure, they had double garages, but they're 4-bedroom units, and it's so for me. I would like to see projects in a rural settings reflect what's there. A light industrial buildings that are going to be built, for example, in Green Rock off of Dufferin there. A lot of effort's been put into those. I still want to see that, where there's a very good focus on the form and character of the buildings and the landscape concepts as well. But when we move more into heavy industrial, offering a little bit more latitude with that, especially if it's away from areas. And so my focus really would like to see the closer we get to our major urban nodes and major arteries, flexibility to do a lot more with density and height to encourage people to build along those areas. And then when it comes down to a few blocks away, when you're getting more into a rural setting, trying to protect those areas. I still want to see growth and encouragement for stormwater management, rain gardens, and landscape concepts like what Angela said, drought-resistant planting, and Jonathan mentioned it too. But those are my key focuses really when it comes down to what I would really like to see in those areas. I wish the success of mixed use when we first introduced it years ago. I wish it would have been more successful. And it's funny, I drive around and I see a lot of these mixed use buildings, and the commercial spaces on the bottom floor are vacant, and sure, the residential's all filled up. So I wish there was more we could do with that, but I think the focus really is on trying to get as much residential as we can. And I'm not sure how we can do this, but I know of rental buildings around where the tenants charge for parking, and nobody wants to pay for a parking stall, so they have to park out on the streets and drive around Turner Road and other areas. You'll see it, and it is wrong. And this is a bylaw thing, so I won't get into it. But we need to do more with that, and parking variances now for me in a lot of these rental buildings are something that I'm not going to be, even though we're not allowed to comment on it. Parking variances in more rural settings are something I'm going to be not supporting in the future, but definitely in urban settings. But that's all I have to say about that. And the next question, I'll comment on that later. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Nathan, would you like to share your thoughts?
Yes, I think that was me.
Yeah, Nathan, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Lots of things there. In terms of specific things of buildings, I think the privacy issues versus the public issues are easily addressed in things like balconies and how we design them. I mean, Kevin would be quite aware of how it's normally done. Most balconies are the cheapest common denominator of vinyl finish, and the building, the deck slopes to a clear guard. That's the cheapest possible way to do it. There's all kinds of energy issues with the structure we can get into, but those balconies don't provide the privacy in most cases that we need. And there's lots of other ways that could be tackled. They typically cost a bit more, but I think there should be wording in the bylaws and the guidelines to talk about that kind of thing. And there certainly is a lot more specifics we could get into. And maybe a strategy would be to go to show projects that are done well, that deal with this issue well, and most of them don't. And this issue is particularly when balconies are eye level or very close to the street or over top of entries. There's all kinds of things that aren't done well, and they make very difficult and awkward spaces that don't need to be that way. So any wording we can introduce about that would be great. The other point about parking, I think is worth noting is, there's some pretty serious efforts at getting rid of off-street parking, which I appreciate, but I don't think it's going anywhere that quickly. And I think, and I brought this up in many design panel meetings about how we can rethink the way we approach parking. And if it's a necessity, which it very likely is, it doesn't need to be approached as a car zone only. And in fact, we can approach it as a people zone, as a priority. And we're working on a project up in Landsville right now where has to be parking in the center of town, and we're creating plazas that have to be there. But they're designed with such great texture and landscaping and variety lighting that it's really plaza-like. And as you enter there with a car, it's like going down a lane where you don't have a right of way. You don't have the authority. It's not really your space. You get to use it, and it's for the people. And I think the more we can create that wording within that kind of context, and I could show you a picture of can I show you a picture?
Yes.
This is, I don't know if you can see this. This is downtown Landsville on McDowell property, but it's a context of a parking lot and a town center that is not about cars, but of course cars have to use that. And I could well imagine at one point you just don't want to go in there with your car, but you can. And so I'd like to see that wording in our bylaws and our guidelines to deal with that. I think to abstract a little bit, and there's been a lot of comments about spatial quality, and I think there's no reason why the guidelines don't have a dialogue, a very sophisticated dialogue about the priority of space as a concept in itself. And I as a designer, we talk about this all the time, and we think about it all the time. And one of the tools I used in school learning about this concept was when you create a town, a model with a town and all these different buildings, and then you pour plaster between these buildings. And then you take this thing out and you talk about this thing. It is more important than the objects. It's more important than the tree. It's more important than the rock. It is what we're doing this for. And the more we think about it as a thing, rather than the objects around it, and how we are creating this thing, the comment about this lane between these buildings, absolutely, those shouldn't be leftovers. Those should be aggressively designed spaces, and the street should be an aggressive design space. And how we transition into the buildings and around buildings, it's more about the shaping of this thing, this abstraction, this thing we don't see is the important thing. And there can be wording to dialogue with that. I mean, how spaces have different intentions. They have very public zones, they have private zones, they have semi-private zones, they have transition zones. There's a lot of things that could be discussed about how a building might interface with the street at that level, and in a little bit more abstract but very assertive dialogue about the priority of the space, and less about the building elements, so that they create it, but they're not for the building elements, they're for the space. And a tree, for example, Jonathan might appreciate it, is less about the object, but more about the canopy and more about the space it's forming. Of course, there's all kinds of technical things of roots and all these things that we have to be aware of, but that's what it should all be about. So the more we can put wording to discuss that kind of abstraction, the very thing that we are doing it for, and less about the objects, then I think that would be a really interesting way of wording the design guidelines. Yeah, okay, we've talked about variety, we've talked about all these different things. I think those are the biggest things we can do. There's so many ways of achieving this stuff, and maybe the design guidelines can have imagery or diagrams as abstractions to demonstrate what the intention of the wording is. I'm as a visual person myself, I think most designers are visual. The words are just, they don't have a lot of meaning in that sense. The images that we receive and we are trying to describe in the words have much, much more depth to try and create that. So I think any of the guidelines, or I think guidelines without images are somewhat pointless. So I think anything we can do to create the images, if there's a topic we're trying to get to with a wording, there should be an image connected to that, and a diagram connected to that, and that's a much better way of allowing access to the information and maybe developing the language over time as well. So that's good for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. So I'll add my comments now. So I agree with what's been said so far by the other panel members. They cover a lot of the things that have been on my mind as well. I guess one other thing I want to add is that we talk a lot about parking guidelines and ways to improve those. But another thing I've noticed is bike parking. So a lot of the developments that are proposed need to have a certain number of short-term bike parking spaces on the site. And I don't know if the current development permit guidelines really have much information on what those should be, some design requirements for bike parking. Like I know in some cities there's requirements for how the bike rack is designed in terms of providing a secure and stable place to prop a bike up. Like I was bringing up the 2 points of contact on the frame a lot, and it seems like a lot of the designers aren't aware that that's important, and they're proposing kind of older styles of bike racks that don't do that maybe are cheaper. I'm not sure why they always propose those ones, but some cities have more specific guidelines in terms of bike parking so that the designers have a bit more guidance. And it can also be things like how far apart the racks are spaced, just so there's adequate room for emerging trends like e-bikes, which maybe are a bit wider and need a bit more space to navigate and park on a bike rack. And I guess like electrical charging in some cases for e-bike racks. So yeah, I think it would be beneficial to have a bit more detail on bike parking requirements. And then, it seems like a lot of designers aren't familiar with what goes into good quality bike parking. And it seems like there's a lot of city staff comments about covering those, and it seems like the designers early covered short-term bike parking right off the bat. So some more detailed guidelines on that would probably be helpful. And hopefully, making bike parking easier and more functional will help alleviate some of the car parking issues that keep coming up. And yeah, Hector's comment about the mixed use. Yeah, I wonder if it just seems like in a lot of the older Nanaimo commercial developments, there's a lot of single-use commercial. And, and why couldn't some of those commercial buildings have residential on upper floors? So moving forward, what can development permit guidelines do to encourage adding more residential and encouraging developers of commercial developments to integrate residential into their buildings? And sometimes light industrial. Often, traditionally, we try to separate residential from industrial and maybe some of those commercial uses from industrial, but in a lot of cases, light industrial uses aren't necessarily as polluting or noisy as they used to be historically, so maybe in some cases residential could work mixed in with those developments. And yeah, Nathan's comment about those car and parking space areas and sort of designing them so that the pedestrian also has a role, or making it more of a pedestrian focused but still shared space. I think that's something that could be good to pursue in a lot of development permit kind of applications that we've been receiving, like some of those high density townhouse developments. A lot of times it's just short roadways that dead end, so there's probably not really going to be a lot of high speed traffic, so why not design those to be more shared spaces with pedestrians? And that can apply to other mixed multifamily developments too. Not sure if this, I just want to talk a bit about stormwater management, and not sure if this is the best one or if maybe it fits more to the energy efficiency one, but sometimes we see stormwater management features like rain gardens, bioswales integrated into the landscape, and a question I often ask the designer is like, what's the catchment area for that feature? Like, because if the goal is things like reducing carbon footprint, reducing the impact on like stormwater, wastewater treatment plants by handling stormwater in the landscape, then it just seems like in a lot of the developments maybe that the rain garden is more like almost greenwashing. It's kind of a bit more of a superficial feature, depending on what it's actually trying to treat. So in a lot of these developments, the water that's the most polluted would be from the roadway because of things dripping off of cars. But where it seems like a lot of the rain gardens are just treating water from the roof or just from the landscape. And I mean, the runoff from the landscape area doesn't necessarily need to go to a rain garden. Like, you could just have deeper topsoil there to handle the rainwater. Like a rain garden can help filter out pollutants from water from the roadway. So, yeah, I guess if there's any development permit guidelines related to stormwater management or rainwater management in the landscape, making sure that like the catchment area that would have the most environmental benefit, like treating water from the roadway, is encouraged. Because if it's just treating water from the landscape, or even in some cases from the rooftop, it's a slight benefit, but it's not really helping with pollution reduction and reducing some of those energy intensive things that happen at wastewater treatment plants that could be reduced by dealing with pollutants through rain gardens. So, yeah, I guess if there's ways to encourage those sustainability features to tackle like the highest impact that's possible on the site. Yeah, in some cases we see developers proposing permeable paving, and I don't know what the requirements are from the city in terms of what that actually means, because pavers aren't necessarily helping with stormwater if the gravel and material underneath isn't the right type to actually infiltrate the water. So permeable pavers may not really be that permeable if what's underneath isn't designed properly. So yeah, I will leave my comments at that for now. So I think we can move on to the final question, which Kristen, yeah, you can, I think that's, Kristen just posted it in the chat, but I'll read it out right now. So what energy efficiency solutions are you seeing being integrated into new buildings and sites? Are there other emerging energy efficiency solutions that you would like to see in development projects in the future? And I will reverse the order again, so we'll start off with Nathan.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yes, the stormwater thing, I really appreciate your comments there. I think that's a huge factor in our climate. And I think there's some really good projects in town that have made excellent use of rainwater. My understanding is there's a bylaw requirement to put storm into the city system, although I'm not sure about that. I would recommend that to address what you're talking about, Jonathan, is there should be bylaws to prevent you from putting water into the city system directly. And there's fantastic wording in many municipalities. Surrey's got one, a lot of Vancouver, they don't allow you to put stormwater directly into the city storm because it's a huge environmental problem. So the idea is that you recharge your land and find ways to deal with it on your site as much as you can, and then you can overflow daylight into the storm system for emergencies and extreme conditions. So there's a lot the zoning and certainly the zoning can do, and certainly a lot of wording in the bylaw in the design guidelines that could encourage that kind of thing. So that would be fantastic. In terms of sustainable features, there's a lot here, and this gets back to my previous comment about height. One of the key ideas we have, or the key problems we have in our environment now, is overheating during the hot months. And one of the easiest ways to deal with this is stack ventilation. And it's a very simple system. I've dealt with projects in hot climates in the Caribbean where it's 40 degrees out, and you need a sweater to go inside that house, and there's no mechanical conditioning in there. And it's just because we thought about how air movements, how you actually cool it. And a lot of it has to do with stack ventilation, and that is the idea that cold air sinks and hot air goes up. And if you can find ways to allow that to happen naturally, and it does happen naturally, it induces airflow and air movement within buildings and induces cooling. And I've had this conversation many times over height. And for example, there's a zoning bylaw that exempts sustainable features from height. It's a wonderful guideline, but the planners will not accept the idea of stack ventilation as a sustainable feature. And I've actually made this argument several times, and I can show you endless pictures of this. So this idea that you could pop up part of your roof somewhere, to let light in and to allow hot air out and create dynamics, variety, that would be such a wonderful thing that the zoning bylaws and the guidelines work together to try and achieve. What I can tell you emphatically that you meet a dead end here when you start to argue this. And I've shown this on several projects where we said, look, we would like to pop an area of a roof up to allow for stack ventilation, which is highly sustainable, but this is banned. It is banned so much that I have to go now for a variance and go to a community center, and the endless process of trying to fight the system to get this in when it's a positive thing, and the bylaws could and the guidelines could address this kind of a thing. So that those are really good examples of how it's a holistic idea. The same idea of sustainability can address variety as well. And it just needs to be thought through and worded through, and somehow not left to the developer going for a variance to achieve good things. It should be encouraged through all of our systems. And there's no reason why it can't be, but it has to be assertive and aggressive. And there are some fantastic wording in the bylaws now to allow it, but there seems to be a timid nature to, that somebody might take advantage of this, or where is this going to go in the future? But I think we need to be a little bit more assertive with our. I think maybe the guidelines could take active role and maybe further have influence on the zoning bylaws to allow this kind of a thing. And I couldn't think of a better way to have sustainable qualities in a building is to have natural air ventilation that cools your building. So I think that would be a high priority in my view, in terms of what we can do for sustainability. Thanks.
Thank you, Nathan. Kevin, would you like to share your feedback?
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan, and I appreciate Nathan's comments. I agree about the stack ventilation comment. Not sure how it can be implemented into a multi-story building with apartments, but the technology has been used for thousands of years, and there's got to be a solution to make something like that work. So I appreciate that, Nathan. Right now, with the sort of the energy solutions we have, we obviously a lot of the basic stuff, the insulation, heat pumps, solar panels, all that are there really in place. I don't think in the future much is going to have to be done with those other than, maybe the heat pumps, as they always do, will get more efficient. Solar panels will get more efficient. The culprits are going to be, it's pretty easy to build to step code 5 right now, or passive house. It's pretty easy to build them and conform to the heating requirements. The tricky part will be the air conditioning, cooling, like what Nathan said. And a lot with the manufacturing industry, a lot will have to be done with appliances. And they are being done. There's heat pumps, clothes dryers now, which are going to help a lot. Refrigerators are going to have to come a long way because they put off a lot of heat. And I've talked to builders that have built passive houses over the last 10, 15 years. And they say the key element's going to be how are they going to be able to deal with the cooling of the building. So I totally agree with Nathan. Any methods, natural methods that can deal with ventilations, like the roof, as you mentioned, is something that I think should be encouraged greatly. Water retention, I agree also with the comments regarding that. Looking at ways to use gray water, which some people are using, but ways to encourage that and methods that can deal with the retention of water, whether it's below ground or whatever, and using it for irrigation, or like what I said, using it as gray water for applications should be encouraged as well. But all in all, I think a lot of the solutions that the industry is currently using and proposing are going in the right direction. The industry has to adapt, obviously, because we have to meet step code 5. And the manufacturing industry has to deal with it too. But and like what I said, appliances that are inside the building which don't conform to form and character. But I think the industry is well on the way to being able to conform to what's going to be required for Step Code 5. But like the water retention, Nathan's comment about stack ventilation, ways to ventilate. I think the cooling of buildings is going to be the key thing, because there was a comment in the staff comments about encouraging smaller windows, which I don't agree with. And a lot of that has to do with heat loss and solar gain and stuff like that. But I think, again, the industry needs to adapt with that, because I don't want all these buildings to look institutional because the windows are smaller. And we're dealing with multifamily. I would like to encourage larger windows. So, but aside from that, that's all I have to say about this question. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Kevin. Angela, would you like to share your comments, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I agree with all the comments thus far. I feel like a lot of my comments are going to be reiterated or echoed by my counterparts, but I'll just go ahead. So I think I did talk about having implementing some like a requirement to conduct a solar efficiency and shadow analysis for all new developments to guide, and also for roof replacements that might that could have the potential to change the roof to ensure optimal solar panel effectiveness if solar panels are going to be installed. I feel like having this analysis done pre-design would be beneficial to the efficiency of solar panels being added to the development. I just think that's something that we could consider as a requirement. Ensure that the building is solar ready and ensure that offsets with solar installation. So of course we already kind of do that. So I just feel like that should be an expectation on all of our developments, is to have that, is to require that all buildings have the ability to install solar if they're not incorporating it into the development itself. On the building cooling and heating, I had made notes that, yeah, for sure, all building design should have passive heating, lighting, and cooling considerations incorporated. And the stormwater management topic, I agree with Jonathan's comments a lot. Trying to minimize impervious surfaces, but doing that in a smart way, not like a greenwashing way, and incorporating stormwater management rain capture to mimic the water balance of that specific site to pre-development flows if possible. And a professional should be involved, of course, to design a system that is sort of watershed specific and has performance targets for that specific area. Like Jonathan says, I feel like the stormwater management is always a quick little discussion, but I don't understand the technologies enough to really go in deep depth, but I think it's important to really have higher expectations out of the stormwater management plans that we receive at design stage. And then just like a timing concern, I know just with the timing of things, when things are presented to different departments, you know, we could review a development and then it goes to building inspection and then it doesn't make sense. And then the technologies now have to change or be deleted or whatnot. So I feel like just an order of things should maybe be not integrated into design guidelines, but I just think it's an important consideration that we time the process correctly, that the things that we're asking for at the form and character DPA stage is feasible and will be able to be implemented at the actual building permit stage. So, and then that incorporating the building code into our design guidelines. So I think that's part of our discussion, is that to ensure that the code is considered at the DPA review stage. So that is all I have to say, aside from, yeah, I do, like I said, I agree with my cohorts here, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Angela. Hector, would you like to go next? Hector, are you muted speaking? Right. I don't see the mute on you, but we can't hear you.
Yeah, probably you can hear me now.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Perfect. Yeah, sorry. No, I agree with most of the comments that everyone said on the panel. I think, like these guidelines needs to follow with the industry, like, electrification, heat pumps, passive house. I'm not gonna go into much detail in that. I think the things that get a bit harder or a bit iffy is things like solar panels. I agree, needs to be like PV ready, but not necessarily enforce that they need to add like solar panels. Maybe the only other thing that we haven't discussed yet is like incorporating like EV chargers, or like sometimes again developers put like one EV charger and then there's like 100 parking spots, and obviously in the next few years that's gonna change and everyone will need an EV charger. But yeah, no, like I think I'm gonna keep it short. So yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Hector. And Councillor Perino.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of things that I've noticed. The thing I can't stand when I see multi-level buildings where you see the air conditioner or the I guess the heat pump on the outside on the deck. I just hate that look. Every single deck has got one. And I wish we could alleviate that in some way so that it's not part of the space that people enjoy. And also from a look perspective, it just looks awful to me. There was a picture actually on your examples of design strategies that actually was before the questions. There's a picture there of solar shading, and I thought, wow, that's a brilliant idea to have the shading and have it solar at the same time. I'd never seen that done before. And in Europe, I know they're doing some work with wind power that is quite different. Like the machines are not the massive machines that you see out in the fields. These are tiny, they're on top of buildings, and they just generate enough wind to, to make quite a bit of difference to the building. So I think there's some good things coming, and I hope that we take advantage of them. It would certainly be helpful, because I certainly worry with, we've got electric bikes, we've got electric cars, we've got a lot of electricity going, we're reducing the use of fossil fuels. I'm worried that the grid's going to be able to handle the load, and there's some really good information saying we're going to need two more Site C dams, and I think that's not going to happen, so it's a little scary. So we have to figure this out, there's no doubt. Actually, this is maybe what will innovate us to think smarter. So lots of good comments. Thank you, everybody. Really enjoyed tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And I'll finish off with a comments of my own. Yeah, I agree with what's been said by the panel so far. I guess the only thing I want to add is just when we're considering encouraging or requiring some new sustainable features, I guess it's important to maybe just do a review and for unintended consequences. A lot of sustainable features work well in some areas due to specific climates or things like that, and might have unintended consequences in a place like Nanaimo, depending on what it is. So just always taking a step back and seeing if it's actually improving sustainability in this specific context. So and also looking at unintended consequences on built form, like I guess if energy efficiency requirements lead to smaller windows, I mean, natural light, access to natural light is important for things like mental health and physical health even, so maybe in some cases those benefits outweigh the energy efficiency increases, so keeping that in mind and encouraging some sustainable features like, let's say, a green roof. There are certain climates where those can be really beneficial, and depending on rainfall patterns and how those change over time with climate change, maybe Nanaimo's specific needs and benefits will be different from a green roof compared to other cities. So, and just, yeah, and unintended consequences of requirements. I can't remember if it was Toronto or there was a city where green roofs were required on certain types of buildings, and then developers were just making roofs steeper so they could get around that requirement because it didn't apply if a roof was a certain slope. So, and I guess things like stormwater management, there's a big push for managing stormwater in the landscape in Vancouver, but a lot of that's driven by their history of combined sewer systems. So stormwater management in the landscape was important for reducing sanitary overflows into the ocean, but Nanaimo's got separate storm sewers, so that's not really an issue here. So I guess with stormwater management goals, just making sure that things required in developments make sense with like specific stormwater situation we have in Nanaimo. So yeah, that's my comment. It's just always kind of taking a step back and trying to predict some of the unintended consequences that might happen. Yeah, so that wraps up our last question here. So I'm not sure from staff, do we need any sort of motion to accept this presentation or anything like that?
Thank you, Chair. I think that would be appropriate.
Okay. Do we need to make any recommendations, or is this kind of like everything's just captured in the minutes that staff needs?
Thank you, Chair. I think that just accepting the presentation and yeah, there's no seeking of recommendations at this time.
All right. So can I get a motion from the panel to accept the presentation? That's Kevin, and seconded by Angela. All in favor of accepting this presentation? All right. Thank you. So next up, let's see here. I don't think we have any other business. I guess Angela's going to be our acting chair at the next meeting while Marie's still away. Any other business from the panel? Doesn't look like it. So can I have a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting? Angela, and seconder. Someone. All right, we'll do Nathan for that. And all in favor of adjourning tonight's meeting? Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. I think that was pretty good discussion.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for your time.
Thank you.